Between the seats, there was another body wedged in, the third one already. It looked gruesome. Hi, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. This story happened in Łódź, and it shocked practically all the residents of Łódź, and definitely all taxi drivers, not only in this city but throughout Poland. An extraordinary story. Mr. Wojtek was an experienced taxi driver from Łódź, 46 years old with many years behind the wheel. For him it was supposed to be just an ordinary day, or at least it was meant to be. As usual, in the morning he put his son, a 13-year-old boy, into his taxi, drove him to school, and as usual he was supposed to pick him up after school. But then suddenly his son finished his classes, went outside the school, waited for his father, but he never showed up. He waited for about an hour and finally thought that something had happened. He went home by himself, but his father, Mr. Wojtek, still didn't come back. Around 10 o'clock post-meridian, the family decided to notify the police. Here, the taxi corporation also started the search at 10 o'clock post-meridian. It was known that on that day, October 7, 1998, he had one ride. The first ride was at 8:40 ante-meridian. The second ride was at 10:06 ante-meridian. And he didn't have any more rides that day. All the taxi drivers were well aware that their profession was exceptionally dangerous. They went out into the city, trying to find their colleague. He drove a graphite-colored Mercedes, but they didn't succeed. One of those who searched for him was his colleague Piotr, a 27-year-old who also took part in the search. The whole night passed, and it was already October 8th, around 7 o'clock post-meridian, this Piotr, who was involved in the search. In the evening, around 7 o'clock post-meridian, he was supposed to drive his wife Beata to some friends. And he's driving through Łódź and suddenly sees that the graphite Mercedes is driving in front of him. He knew Wojtek, of course. He knew his car. He knew Wojtek. But he realized that Wojtek wasn't the one behind the wheel of that car. It was someone completely different, so he started following him. It lasted for a while. The person driving the car started to speed up, realized that Piotr was simply following him, that he was driving behind him, sped up and turned onto Bankowa Street. At that time, Mr. Kazimierz, who simply ran out of water at home, took a bucket, went to a nearby hydrant, filled the bucket with water, and was returning home. When that Mercedes appeared on Bankowa Street, it was already speeding. The driver lost control, hit his bucket, lost control, and then crashed into the house. By then, Piotr had also arrived. A fit man, 27 years old as I said, jumped out of the car and started chasing the one who jumped out of the Mercedes. A young guy also jumped out of the Mercedes and he just started chasing him. He probably would have caught up to him without any problems, but the one who was running away suddenly turned around, had a pistol in his hand, and started shooting. Piotr just fell and the other one ran away. The situation was tragic. It was clear that he had been shot several times. His wife, Beata, was in shock. Then, as the paramedics said, it was something, I would say, terrifying, because she was just sitting on the street, her husband's head on her lap, and she kept repeating, "Piotr will come back." Such a moving scene. Yes, that Piotr. The taxi driver was quickly taken to the intensive care unit. He was still alive. The doctors started fighting for his life, but unfortunately they lost that fight and Piotr died. It was a shock because he was shot by some thug. At the place where the car was left, on Bankowa Street, of course the police arrived quickly, but the taxi drivers got there first. They simply, Piotr, while driving, was informing his dispatch that he was chasing this car, so the taxi drivers arrived first and went to the trunk of that Mercedes. They opened the trunk, and inside were the remains of their colleague, that very Wojtek. He was dead. It looked like he had also been shot, and he was the second taxi driver to die in such a gruesome way. But when they went to the car and looked inside, it was a real horror, because between the seats there was another body stuffed in. That was the third body. It looked gruesome because it was like a kind of hearse with human bodies, one in the trunk, another inside the car. The police arrived at the scene and began the investigation. They quickly determined that the one who was stuffed into the seat was a man who didn't have a dangerous job. He was simply a parking attendant. 62-year-old Mr. Wiesław. Right here, right after Łódź, a rumor spread that there was a serial killer who was shooting at everyone and that anyone could be in danger. Well, of course. The taxi drivers were the most afraid because 2 taxi drivers were killed within 2 days. Of course, for the police it was a huge challenge. The case was famous all over Poland with enormous pressure. A serial killer roaming the city, shooting with such ruthlessness at anyone who got in his way. So the police officers simply dropped everything and started working on this very case. As I said, there was fear in the city, especially among taxi drivers. They drove around the city keeping watch. They more or less knew the description of the man who escaped from the Mercedes. They knew he was a young man. They also knew how he was dressed. They simply drove around the city looking out for someone like that. But it didn't bring any results. At that time, Piotr Domański, that was the name of the young man, was 22 years old. He was studying at the Łódź University of Technology in the Faculty of Electrical Engineering. He wasn't very eager to study, but he wasn't a stupid guy, quite talented and intelligent, so he could handle his studies without any problem. He just lost interest in learning. At first he was doing okay, but then he completely lost motivation to study because he decided that nothing would really come out of it. He came to the conclusion that it just wasn't worth studying, and on October 5th, 1998, he was simply removed from the list of students. And he came to the conclusion that he needed to make a lot of money, a lot and fast. He even already had a plan ready. First, he borrowed money from his brother. His brother withdrew the money from his savings account. Their father got mad at them because when he found out that his brother had withdrawn the money, he made a scene for both of them. Piotr said he would return the money as soon as possible, so what did he do with the money? Piotr went to the Górnik market and simply bought a gas pistol there. It was a time in Poland when there were a lot of gas pistols. You could simply buy them like that because it was legal to carry gas pistols. Only later did people realize that converting a gas pistol into a real firearm was very easy and anyone could do it. And that's exactly what Piotr did. He had quite a lot of skills and knowledge, but it wasn't really a big problem, and he simply converted the gas pistol into a real firearm. He already had a weapon, he had a plan, and for that he needed a car. He decided that he would get the car by simply killing a taxi driver. That day, on October 7th, he ordered a ride, introduced himself as Maciejewski, waited for the taxi driver, and Mr. Wojtek arrived. He got into the car and ordered the ride to a secluded place where there are no houses, basically just fields on the outskirts of Łódź. And at the moment when Wojtek stopped the car, he pulled out a gun and shot him in the head 3 times. Wojtek didn't even have a chance to realize what was happening. Then, after he shot the taxi driver, he pulled him out of the car, that is, his body, put it in the trunk along with the bloody seat covers. He also removed the taxi signs from the car and threw everything into the trunk as well. He got into the car and drove to one of the banks in Łódź. That was the next stage. It was his plan. He simply planned to shoot Cinciarz. For those who don't know, Cinciarz was someone who simply traded currency, most often either near currency exchange offices or right by banks. It was characterized by the fact that these men stood there all day. They had lots of money in rolls, and it was all kinds of money, zlotys, dollars, pounds, and francs. Well, as I said, he had quite a lot of money from the Cinciarz. Domański started observing one of these Cinciarz. He realized that he was active, that he had a lot of money. Also, because of his age, he probably wouldn't have any problems with him, so he waited until this man, let's call it, finished his work in front of the bank. Then he continued to follow him and realized that the Cinciarz parked his car in the parking lot on Wojtek Street. When he already knew a lot about this Cinciarz, he simply decided to attack him, rob him, and shoot him. He drove that car to a remote place, realized that when he shot Wojtek, he stained his pants and took a nap in that car. It even bothered him that there was a taxi driver's body in the trunk of that car. The next morning he went to the market, bought himself new pants there, changed in the car, and decided to carry out his plan, which was to attack Cinciarz that day, October 8th. Domański had plenty of time. He knew that Cinciarz would finish work late in the evening, so in the morning he went to the university. There he picked up some papers, documents stating that he had just been removed from the student list. And then he went to the parking lot, or somewhere near the parking lot, at Wojtek and waited for Cinciarz. Indeed, around 6 o'clock post-meridium that man showed up. Domański planned that he would simply walk up to him, shoot him, and then pull the body into the car. And indeed he carried out that plan 100%. When the black market dealer supposedly showed up, he walked up to him, shot him instantly, and then pulled his body into the car of the man he had shot. Earlier, he had driven there. No one heard the shot, or maybe someone did, but after all, it's a parking lot, so a shot from a carburetor could have sounded similar. No one simply reacted and drove away. Well, the one he shot wasn't a money changer, he was just a parking attendant from that parking lot. Mr. Wiesław, who had already been retired for several years, was working as usual that day. On October 8th, he first went to his daughter's place, but she wasn't there. They somehow missed each other. Then he returned to the parking lot. Around 6 o'clock post-meridium, he was walking home, and his family was already waiting for him with dinner, but he never arrived. They started to worry about what had happened to him. They called his replacement here. He said that he had already gone home a long time ago, so the grandson took the route that his grandfather usually takes home. And at some point he saw his grandfather's cap lying on the ground. It was covered in blood, and a little further on there were blood stains. Well, he got scared because he realized that something must have happened, but the body wasn't there because, as you know, Domański took the body to the car. A moment later, Domański stopped the car and started searching the body of the man he had shot. He was convinced that he had shot the money changer, so he frantically searched for the money. He didn't find the money, he was furious, and then he realized that the money changer had completely different shoes, that this man looked similar to the money changer, but it wasn't him. He realized that he had simply made a mistake. He was angry at himself, furious that such a mistake had happened because he had shot someone who didn't have any money at all. That was his first stroke of bad luck that day, when he was driving that Mercedes through the streets of Łódź, so furious. That's when Piotr, his colleague from the taxi corporation, saw him and started chasing him. He shot at him too and then started to run away. Despite the fact that the situation was, I would say, very frantic, he didn't lose his composure somehow. His mind. He realized that the police would come to the scene, that they would bring tracking dogs, that they would chase him. And that's why he didn't run down the street. He simply got onto the roof of one of the buildings and escaped across the rooftops. In this way, of course, the dogs lost the trail because he was escaping across the rooftops. To that extent, he was logical in some way. With all that, when older people saw him, he pretended to be a drunk who was mumbling incoherently. Those people also thought he was just some drunk who climbed onto the roof and didn't really know what to do with himself. Then he made his way to the bus stop. Before he even got to the bus stop. He took advantage of finding an abandoned building, slept there, and only then did he go to the bus stop and leave Łódź. Well, he managed to get to the allotments somewhere near Łódź, and there he broke into his friend's allotment. He had simply been there before. He knew that such an allotment existed, that he could hide out there, so he started hiding there. He was aware that he had killed 3 people, and the next day he even called home, but the police were basically already on his trail. He found out from his family that his family even asked him if he had anything to do with it. Well, he lied. He told them he had nothing to do with it. But this way, he found out that the police were simply looking for him. He was hiding in that garden shed. Then he broke into another one, and out of boredom, he started writing a diary. First, he took a notebook with all kinds of notes about matches. He just found that notebook and started writing down some of his memories there. When he ran out of pages, he went to the kiosk and got himself another notebook that he liked. He liked it because, as he said, there was a cheerful little duck and flowers on the cover of the notebook. That's why he bought it. He started writing down his memories, his thoughts, everything connected to the fact that he began to hide, and everything that was happening around him. The police quickly determined who the killer was. Because he was a bit like a macabre kid, basically he couldn't do anything. It turned out here, as you remember, that he bought himself new pants because he stained the old ones with Wojtek's blood. But it turned out that in those old pants he left his university library card, he left his comb in the plastic bag, and there were his hairs on the comb. He also left some drink leftovers, and he also left a balaclava. When he was preparing for the robbery, he made himself a balaclava with holes cut out for the eyes, and everything was there. There were his hairs, there were his fingerprints, so the police very quickly had everything related to the killer. They knew his first and last name, they had his DNA, they had his fingerprints. Nothing else was needed. All that was left was to catch him and detain him. Well, that was difficult because he was hiding out in those allotments. That's why, 5 days later, on October 13th, a wanted notice was issued for him, and during that time he was just sitting and writing his diary. There's an entry from October 16th, more or less. He wrote then that he's been here for 6 days already, that he's hiding, and why he's here. It's hard to answer that. There's no clear answer. I killed 3, not any of those people either. He goes on to write that he's starting a new life. What kind of new life is that? Well, it's hard to understand in some way. It's something new. His life is burdened by the fact that he lost everything he loved up to now. So he lists his mom, dad, brother, and sister. He lost all of that, but as he wrote, he's starting a new life. Well, he also wrote about his life. He wrote that up until around 1996. His life was going quite well. Then came some pressure to make quick money. He wanted to have a lot of money. He also wanted to change himself. He saw himself as someone strange, and he wanted people to respect him. He wanted to sign up for bodybuilding, so that people who were around him or looked at him would see someone who was confident and who was a successful person. He wrote that the year 1999 would be a breakthrough year for him. These are more like his fantasies, confabulations. Because I don't know, I can't imagine how he could become someone new. But he wrote exactly about that in 1999 he would have a new face, new documents, a lot of money, a car. How he wanted to do it, well, it's hard to say. He also wrote about his plans to get money. It turned out that before the plan to rob the money changer appeared, he wanted to trade in stolen cars. But he came to the conclusion that it wouldn't really work because you can still hide a car, but what do you do with it afterward? Well, it just seemed too complicated to him. Then he came up with the idea to rob a currency exchange office. By then, he already had a pistol and started watching one of the offices. He decided that this was the one he would rob. It seemed that even then he wanted to shoot. He went to that currency exchange office, but it turned out that it was closed that day. So he went to the next office and stood in front of it. Well, but he couldn't make up his mind because he concluded that it might be too difficult and he didn't have the courage to rob that exchange office. That's when he also concluded that it would be much easier to rob and shoot the security guard. For that, he needed a car. And that's everything you already know, the gruesome consequences of this. And to refer to it, refer to who, as if he wasn't aware of what he really wanted to do. The police, of course, are doing what they can to stop him, and they realize that someone must be helping him. They even identified a circle of his friends, his acquaintances. At that time, everyone, his family and those friends had their phones tapped. He actually called not only his family earlier, but also his friends, especially two of them. He was hiding somewhere near Woods, that's a town not far from Łódź, and he was calling from there. The last entry in this diary is from November 6th, so as you can see, he was hiding for almost a month. On November 8th, he went to a phone booth to call one of his friends. When he called, the police were already there waiting for him. They expected him at the moment he made the call, and they figured he would use that phone again sooner or later. He was caught. Interrogations. He basically confessed to everything. That diary of his was the best evidence for all of it. Then he started making things up, saying that he shot Wojtek with drugs, that he didn't fulfill some deal he had promised him. Of course, nonsense, he was just making things up. He probably realized then that he would spend many years in prison. It was completely different to have killed a taxi driver or an innocent parking attendant than to have killed someone over drug debts. That's probably why he made up that kind of lie. He didn't want to join the emotional reenactment. He said it was too emotional for him, that he wouldn't take part in all of this because he was experiencing it too deeply. Domański. Of course, he was also examined psychiatrically, and the doctors determined that he was a person with a high intelligence quotient. He himself said that he perceives the world in a very aggressive way, that people are simply aggressive, and therefore he is aggressive and unfriendly towards them. It was, in a way, a reaction. He also resented his father for treating his younger brother differently, simply better. He felt some resentment about it, but he also said that when he was shooting, when he was killing, he didn't experience it as someone who was taking part in it, but rather as if he was sitting in front of the television and watching it all. It didn't concern him directly. Probably that's why he so easily pulled out that pistol and killed people. In this case, his friends were also held responsible, that's Radek and Maciek. For almost a month, they provided him with food, gave him money, and thanks to them, he was able to hide so effectively. They got 2 years suspended for 3 years, so the sentence, I would say, was rather symbolic in this situation. On December 20-20, 1999, Domański was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of applying for parole after 30 years. Less than a year ago, on April 22, 2025, Domański wrote a request for pardon to the president. In this request, in this letter, he wrote that he had undergone rehabilitation, that he knows what he did, that he would like to erase the shame he caused before, and that he is now leading a stable life. It sounds a bit bizarre because what kind of life could he lead in a prison? So he wrote about all of this, hoping that the president would pardon him. Well, the Court of Appeals, because that's the procedure, didn't take into account what he wrote, that he is a trained information technology technician, that he would like to get married, start a family, that he would like to take care of his parents who are already in their 70s, that he doesn't associate with prison gangs, that he was a librarian in prison, that he was a bookbinder, that he even participated in or worked at the prison radio station. The court found that all of this was simply not enough for him to be pardoned. Last year, Domański's request for a pardon is simply lying in the office. It hasn't been processed. And it doesn't seem like anything will move forward in this case. Well, of course, life goes on. This tragedy is especially remembered by taxi drivers in Łódź, especially the older ones. It's still a kind of warning for them. However, the family of Piotr, the taxi driver who was shot, moved away and now lives somewhere else. In the meantime, the wife of Wojtek, the taxi driver who was shot, passed away and is buried in the same cemetery where Mr. Wojtek is buried. That's the one who was shot, the parking attendant. Even Romuald, the one known as Cynthias, moved away from Łódź. He realized that on October 8th he was given a new life, that he was shot by accident. Someone else, not him, so he probably didn't really want to live in Łódź either. Today, Mr. Wisław's daughter talks about it. She wonders if Domański will get out after 30 years, because after 30 years, as you remember, he can apply for early release. Well, Domański wrote that he would like to make amends for the harm he caused. Mr. Wisław's daughter says that he could do it in one simple way, just give her father back. But that's rather impossible. And that's all for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel and of course, take care.